Thank you, folks. So my name is Emanuil Tolev. As it says up there, I work for Elastic, makers of the Elk Stack, Elasticsearch, and other open source projects. Today I'm not going to be talking about that, but if you have any questions or complaints about any of the Elastic products, I'd like to hear about them. So I'm a community engineer at Elastic, so it is my job to buy drinks and get feedback from suitably drunk people back to the product management teams. No, it actually is my job to do this. So today it's a slightly different topic, and it's a slightly shorter slot than kind of the topic needs. And also a lot of you, so how many of you are ops people? Can you raise your hand? Okay. Yeah, the DevOps counts, yes. Okay, so just as I expected, it's a slightly more like general meetup. It's the web meetup. There'll be a lot of devs here. So I've modified things a little bit. So I will tell you like what we were doing as kind of an on-call culture, and then what I went through and kind of a negotiation process that I went through. Then I'll try to relate that a bit more to aspects of your dev life that you'd be able to use this in. Otherwise, it's a story, a bit of a cautionary tale. So let's see, let's get into it. This is a talk mainly about negotiation, and there will be a little bit of ops. And when we talk about negotiation, we have to think about like who we are, where our lines are, like what we find acceptable and what we would find unacceptable. So that's something that we'll come back to later. Out of university, I started freelancing with this tiny hipster collective of freelancers called Cottage Labs. And Cottage Labs dealt with open science and open access to science. I became a partner in May 2014 and started needing to do a lot of other things besides just dev work. I took on ops projects and being on call. I had to take on kind of strategy work, so telling clients what will we do about this problem that you had last week, and going and implementing the configs for this problem that you had last week, and being on call for my own strategy, which was and it's an interesting experience, I would say. I was also responsible for software development, getting in new business, accounting, management, and a lot of the other fun things that come with running a small agency. And then, in fact, we are currently, and thanks to Code Computer Lab, to the hosts, and to YLD, these are both kind of agencies in their different ways. So we're going to focus on actually one of these clients. Well, they had two clients that form the core of this story. I was 24/7 on call for 4 years because we were a small shop, and I was the person most interested in ops. So let's see how well that went. So some people are already laughing. They overlapped completely, right? So I started with one client, the one we're going to talk about. Then I did about 3 years, 3 months with the other client, kind of in the middle. So we're just going to talk about, just because of time, we're just going to talk about the non-profit client today. The overall setup was just a Python app that we had built for them, so we were also their dev partner. We were their only technical partner. The rest of the people in their organization were not technical. I was the only ops person for about 2 years, and then later on, an employee that we hired joined me, and he was relatively junior, and we'll come back to that later. So in terms of where we ended up, when the second person joined, I had to write some documentation. We were an entirely remote agency. So I lived in Wales, my partners lived in Scotland and in England respectively, and the employee lived in Scotland himself. So there were architecture diagrams that we made relatively simple. If a request comes in, this is exactly where it's going to go. The whole stack, we had just Nginx, Python, and Elasticsearch in the back. And we had more documentation to give context to some of the decisions we had made. Like, why use Elasticsearch as a single source of truth rather than in front of a database? It is a stupid idea. I mean, don't do that, right? That's not what it's designed for. But we did it for years. I think they're still doing it. So we, at the most pertinent part, is that we, together with him, we developed playbooks for incidents. So in the beginning, when something would go wrong, I would log in and I would like try to guess which server the problem might be on, and I would go and tail the logs and eventually figure out the problem, restart some things, and it would be back up. So with him, we developed playbooks which had different entry points. So there was a table of contents, and so like if it said a certain kind of error, if the monitoring returned a certain kind of error, then you would like go to the playbook and click that link, and it will scroll you down. It just a Google Doc with headings, right? And it will scroll you down to that section. Like Elasticsearch is down, you click there, go down, okay, this is what you need to do to restart it, this is what you need to check first, because just restarting sometimes doesn't work, right? This is how to diagnose the Python app, and so on. So playbooks is really important. So if you're a small organization and you're maintaining applications, the knowledge tends to live in some people's heads, then this is the first step I would suggest that you do. Just sit down all together and do a playbook of what people can remember has gone wrong. And then when you do a retrospective on every incident after that, add that calls, literally add the start error message as a prompt, and then add the instructions on how to fix that problem to the playbook. Right? This is kind of separate from evolving your system. Like you can evolve your system so that it's better and it doesn't have that problem anymore, but you should, like the playbook helps the people on call just deal with the problem, whatever it is. So don't just focus on upgrading the system. I've seen that a lot, and it's something I've done myself. Don't just change the structure of the system, like record what has happened and what you would do in a similar situation. And the only way to really learn is to actually be in charge of incidents and to try to fix incidents. So eventually you have to put your people on call as well. PagerDuty is a great product that allows you to do scheduling if any of you are thinking of like how to do this practically. So like scheduling in the sense that for 8 hours, me and him are on call, and for 8 other hours, employee 3 and 4 are on call, and so on and so forth, if we only had that. Right, so being 24/7, like I started pretty young in this position, like as I said, this is a few years after university. I felt like that price was enough that I would do literally anything for a retainer because it was an insecure type of work, right? So this was consulting, and there were small projects. We were prototyping pretty often, and I was also in a long-term relationship at the time, and so I kind of needed some security. And a retainer like this really is a pretty good basis. But the problem is that because of the rest of the insecurity, coming in an insecure state to a negotiation or talking to a client while you're insecure will probably make you overpromise, and if you try to deliver what you overpromised, it will be bad for you. Okay, so the problem here isn't really the money. You can overpromise for more money as well. The problem here is that when you're insecure, you want to do as much as possible. You want to give as much as possible, like kind of naturally. And the problem with that is that there is no upper limit on as much as possible. Like we don't know what the value of that is. There's no end to it. You just keep giving and keep hoping the client will be happy, and that's it. Sorry. So I kind of felt at the time that being on call was, I felt that it was kind of paid, I was being paid to just sit around, right? Unless the phone rings. So, and I mean, for a lot of the time that is kind of sort of true in the sense that you're not at your computer doing stuff. And this was the primary disconnect that I had. Because as a dev, I was working when I was typing, or at least thinking. But not like when I was in the park or something like that near my house. So the truth is this is not the case. So here are some examples of what you cannot do while you're on call. You cannot get on a plane while you're on call, or you have to tell your on-call pair or your stakeholders that you're getting on a plane. Like you literally cannot. You cannot go into a cinema because there is often bad signal there without doing those things, telling other people. You cannot drink more than 1 light beer because you have to be in a good state to actually remember the components of your system. You might have to, and I have had to do this more than I would like, You might have to stop mid-dinner or in the middle of having a good time, right? Because you were on call. And when you're 24/7 on call, this becomes even worse, right? Or any other prolonged period of time, or too many evenings if you're in a larger team than mine. It has quite a big impact on your life, and this is what people are paying you for. They're paying you to be ready, to be there if their system goes down, and to be able to fix it. So there is definitely value in that, and I can't really put an exact price on it. 1,100 is too little. I have heard things between 3,000 and 6,000 per month for this kind of 24/7 arrangement. I would say that it depends on the situation, but think about the value that the client is getting out of you, or that your organization is getting out of you in such a situation, right? So don't think of what it costs you, or that it's easy for you. It doesn't matter. You can be paid a lot of money for doing something easy. It doesn't have to be hard, right? The question, they will pay if it's really valuable to them. And if it's not valuable enough to pay more, then they don't need it. Don't do it. And we'll also come back to the value question later, because that's important in negotiation. So as you can imagine, I actually went on for a surprisingly long time like this, for 4 years. But in September 2017, I burnt out pretty badly. I got pretty depressed after that. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure that I'm still quite out of that, but I have recovered to a much more significant degree. So I had to leave the little company that I was running, and at least the employee who's on call with me took over as a partner, so I guess I must have done something right. But before he took over, I decided that I had to do something, because he was very conscientious. I don't know whether I am, but I knew that he was. And he was sometimes anxious about his work quality, just like me, so he could be a little insecure about his work output. So I thought, well, I mean, the same thing is going to happen, right? And it could happen even faster. So I have to do something. Like, I am his manager. Like, I have to, even if I'm leaving, which they didn't know at the time, I have to do something. So there was a face-to-face client meeting with this nonprofit. They were coming to London. This is the venue. This is the Institute of Directors in London. It's this pretty chill place, actually, surprisingly. So if any of you are running small startups or companies, I recommend looking at them. But this was the setting, if you will. And so we sat down, and we had a nice lunch, and we chatted about ongoing development priorities and other things. And then came up the subject of the on-call contract that we have. We call it the regular hosting contract. This is what I said. This is a bit of a thorny topic. Do you really need 24/7 cover? They were a little taken aback at this. They're like, well, of course. I mean, we've been getting it for like years. Of course we need 24/7 cover. And then I followed up with, this is not sustainable for us. As an organization, we just can't provide you with that service anymore. It's not the rate, although we do believe that the rate is too low, and they agreed on that. But it's just that we would rather provide you with office hours support, like UK office hours support on this project. So that's kind of the pitch, right? As you can see, this is a bit difficult, right? There isn't really a lot of positives at the first glance in here for them. There's something in it for us, but So this is the questions that they followed up with. What would it mean in practice? Because they're not technical, we have to explain. And so be ready for that when you're talking to business stakeholders. Explain what that will mean to them. Make sure to speak their language. They were very keen to know if the site will be down for many, many hours when we're not providing on-call cover. And this is, I guess, the sticky point. The truth is that the site will probably not be down for very long. It could be. If it went down at 6:01 p.m., then we would fix it at 9, 10 a.m. the next morning. That is true. However, when we looked at the incidents which had occurred, and there were enough to look at, and because we had a log of retrospectives, like what had happened when the incident happened, how long it took to fix, like relatively basic stuff. We could go through that with them, and they were very open to doing this. And so we told them, or I told them, it's possible that it will be down for many hours, but this is a trade-off, right? It's a risk, and it's a trade-off of different risks that you have. So the question is, what does the trade-off cost in this case? And so here the cost of the trade-off was very high for us, right? Just to ensure that this thing would stay up 24/7, we were putting in too much work, frankly, for too little money. So the cost of the trade-off for us was quite high. So I had to explain that because they couldn't know this. So you have to remember that, like when you're in a similar situation, you have to actually, kind of you have to set out your position, because like if you're talking to your CEO or to other business people who you're working with, or just to, if you're an ops person talking to developers, if you're a DevOps person talking to other colleagues, they don't have the knowledge of the human cost of what you do. You have to explain that, and people will relate to it. Like reasonable people, especially if they're your colleagues, they will relate to it. Like eventually they will need something from you, it's a work relationship, right? They will need some work from you, but ultimately they will relate to this, and you might have to come up with unique analogies to explain the cost of what you're doing and the cost of being on call. Or the cost of whatever you do in your work that's causing you problems. So then the last thing that they got into was, we're getting less cover, right? We're getting less for the same money. Can you explain what's going on? And so this kind of not really getting around, and there's no easy way to get around this, and I suggest not really beating around the bush when you're in a situation like this where you have to give less. So the reason why we even entered into this difficult conversation is because we didn't want to do this anymore. We're not willing to do it anymore. So I just went out with that. I said, well look, it's been a very fun 4 years waking up at 3 a.m. and fixing the website for this much money, but I'm not willing to do it anymore. I'm happy for us to be development partners. And as I said, this is not really about the rate. I would just like us to consider very seriously office hour support or none. Right? We're happy to work with someone else to provide the on-call support, like we'll continue being your dev partner, or you, of course, if you want, you can switch both projects away from us. So in the negotiation, this is also important. You have to be willing to walk away, after all. Otherwise, you're just kind of screwing them around, either for money or for just because you don't want to do something, but you still rely on them. And I was willing to walk away. Like, I might not have been willing to do it for myself, but there was another person who was now following in my footsteps, and I was not willing to put him through the same thing. And that he was also more junior. I thought he didn't have the same kind of insight that I had after my years, and so I felt responsible for applying that insight and having that difficult conversation. So, what did the client say to our answers to their questions? So these are somewhat text-heavy slides, which I know is a no-no generally, but I want to read these out because they are quotes. That makes sense. We want this work relationship to be sustainable and good for everyone. We're okay with the elevated risk of long downtime outside UK office hours. We want to thank Cottage Labs for your dedication in the past few years. That was quite a positive surprise for me. I thought I was going to have to work quite a fair bit harder for it, but I think I had gone in kind of strong enough while still professional enough that they realized that I meant what I said. It was either office hours or no support. And they liked us. Of course, this relies on the previous relationship you have with your company or your boss. It might be more appropriate for you if you're in a similar situation, either in your dev life or in your ops life. If you're not happy, it might be more appropriate to walk away and find something else to do. it could have been more appropriate for them. But based on our previous relationship, they decided that they didn't want to do that. As far as I understand, so they accepted the agreement. It was 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. UK hours. And as far as I know, it's still in place. So I'd like to also thank Infrastructure Services for Open Access for being such reasonable customers. And the reason I'm showing you this, the reason I'm reading all these slides is because I want you to remember this when you're not treated well in a professional negotiation situation. And you should just find new clients or a new workplace ASAP if that happens. You need to remember that being treated well is possible. And being treated well doesn't have to be that they agree to everything you say, right? But they have to give you good reasons and to treat you well throughout the negotiation process. And it's perfectly okay if at the end of that civil conversation, both parties walk away because they need something from you that you cannot give them. It's fine to part ways amicably, right? You can just do that. But I need to remember that this kind of thing is possible. Just a healthy conversation, and then you both part ways, and it's fine. So, what are the lessons that I would draw from this? I'd say reflect earlier on how things feel. Regularly would be ideal. So just like we had technical retrospectives when there were problems, we should have had retrospectives on how we felt, on the relationship with the client, and probably on the relationship with our work. And this is something you can do yourselves. Doesn't matter what job you do. You can sit down every month or every quarter and just write down your thoughts. How did this last period of however many months feel? How do you feel? Do you feel better? Do you feel worse? We should have, just like Agile retrospectives, we should have drawn some kind of timeline and maybe tracked that somehow. I don't really know exactly what form this would take, but after you write your current reflection, not before, after you write it for the last month, then you should sit down and read what you've written in the previous months. And that kind of gives you, like a graph almost of sorts, very subjective graph of your mood over time. I should have kept my teammates more in the loop about how I felt. So there were also devs that didn't do any ops work on this project, and I guess talking to them more, not just about how the work is going, not like the technical parts and what we were going to change in the system, but how I was feeling. If I'd done that, that would have been better. And the same with the employee that was later helping me. Although we ended up talking a little bit, but it was a bit too late. You should take a decision to change things as early as possible. You can't take decisions too early. You kind of have to wait sometimes until it becomes clear. But if you're not doing that process from the first point, then you're not gonna know when it's time. It's kind of like the boiling frog analogy. You just kind of feel worse and worse, but because of a feeling of professionalism, you keep going, because as a professional I must deliver value. And you keep doing it no matter the circumstances, because that's what being a professional means. No matter the circumstances, you keep delivering value. But if it's worse and worse, eventually you'll burn out. And this is also this is kind of how we turn it around with our clients. Like in the end, if you look here, they understood that there was a positive thing in there. They would get a continued relationship with us, and it would be healthy for us as well, right? So yes, they would get reduced cover, and that was kind of a less of a thing, that you get something lesser, but they would get something that they didn't know they had, that they didn't know they should value, right? That they would get us being well and wanting to continue to work on this. And that is a real thing. It's not only technology, it's the willingness to work and goodwill are things that are useful in the negotiation, like whether that's for salary or anything else. So the same applies to your jobs. So let's talk a little bit about you. What are your values? I just wanted to take like 10 seconds to think about what are your values in general. and life? And how do they apply to work? In the next 10 seconds. Maybe there isn't. Maybe you for now, it's pretty woolly. You know, maybe you're not thinking of how to apply your values to work as of yet. I suggest you do that. It will help you in negotiation a lot. It will help you know where your lines are. What is unacceptable, what are you not willing to cross. If you have a family, you care about your family, then there's certain things there, like coming home at certain times or being paid for overtime and not doing it too often and so on and so forth. What are your values? Like how much do you value yourself? And you know, in general, that should probably be higher than it is at the moment, if I know anything about developers. So I wanted to ask you I want you to think of another question. Think of asking your boss for temporarily reduced hours due to stress. You want to work 20, 25 hours a week right now, starting from tomorrow. You walk into the office and you tell them that. Can you raise your hand if you thought, reduced hours just due to stress? Okay, very good. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, right. So, and I know that it's kind of hard to say this because you might think it reflects on your workplace. Actually, a lot of workplaces are like that. It is often thought of as not serious enough reason. You're not physically injured. You got your fingers and like you can breathe. You don't have the flu, so you can come into work. But it doesn't make any sense in a knowledge work environment at all. The impact of those things on your work, like right now, every day, on your daily work, is very, really high. The impact of these things on your long-term life is even higher. If your workplace values you and they want you to remain healthy because they want you to continue working from them, and by the way, the longer you continue working from them, the more your value to them increases because you know more about their systems as well as gain skills. The more they value you, the more they will want your long-term well-being to be good, right? So you should be aligned on this. It doesn't make any sense for companies to take a purely extractive stance, get as much work of you out as possible, like for over 40 hours, 60 hours, until you burn out. It doesn't make any business sense for them to do that, but many do, and that's a short-sighted view in my opinion, but you don't have to subject yourself to that. Right? And Manchester is a big city, and there are a lot of remote positions nowadays as well. Now, if you think about the same thing, but asking for a raise. So you deliver certain value, and it does go up with time and experience. So if you think of the same thing, of asking for a raise, similar things are at play, and this is a different kind of negotiation, but the lines that you draw could be similar, and at the core of this is how much do you value yourself, and do you realize when your skills go up in value and when your contributions become more valuable. So having regular retrospectives can help you with this too. Right? So you just do it for yourself and for your own work, as well as how you feel about the work. You can write down new things that you've learned, or how you feel you're able to deliver more value. You could just literally ask yourself that question. I know it's a bit businessy, but that's kind of what you'll need to bring to this negotiation. So it's good to get in the habit of thinking like that. The one tip I'd give you is try to separate how valuable I am as a person from the value the company receives from my labor under this particular agreement. Right? They're two different things, and a lot of devs are so attached to their work as an identity that they start thinking that how valuable their contributions are, even if they're not being compensated entirely, is related to who they are. Whereas it's not. Like the environment you're in and a lot of other factors about the company or the project dictate how much value you're able to provide. Like I can provide very little value, or maybe some, to a Go project. if it was like a dev-heavy position rather than engineering management. So, but then if it was a Python project, or if it was something that I knew a lot about as a domain, then I might be able to provide a lot more value. So you have to think of, I suggest thinking of it as labor in this specific company, in this specific role, in these circumstances. That's what you're performing. And try to think of it from an external point of view. How valuable is this to these people? And when you ask for a raise, that will come into play, right? If you think it's more valuable, for real, and they're trying to undermine you, playing tactics to undermine you, it's not a good working relationship to stay in long term. Like, just look for somewhere where your manager will take the same view. That's a relationship, there's some labor being done, the company is deriving this kind of value, what's gone up over the past X months. Yes, I think this is appropriate, or this sum is not appropriate. But they'll have a civil conversation about it rather than try to guilt trip you, right? This is what you need to avoid. Right, so trust yourself. This is really hard to do. You need to trust yourself enough to make mistakes. Trust yourself enough so that when you go into the office, you will have bad days when you trust yourself. Because you will go down rabbit holes, which might turn out to be wrong. Some days you will deliver less value than your salary for that exact day. And that's super hard to measure. This is fine. You have to accept this. This is part of being a professional. Trying to, like a drowning person, trying to scramble to a line of perfection every single day will result in less valuable work over time. You will feel worse. And you'll perform a lot worse than your potential. And your company has to accept that you will have bad days, and that part of trusting yourself and taking risks involves having bad days, and involves mistakes, and involves going down the wrong rabbit holes. But long term, this helps you be a better professional, become more self-confident as a professional, and trust yourself more. And that actually allows you to far exceed, in terms of value delivered, the amount you're being paid on many other days, except the bad ones. So overall, it balances out in their favor, which is what employment is about, right? So this is kind of both so you can stay well as deliver value, and you have to remember that. And it doesn't really matter whether the company cares whether you're well or not. You have to care about that. Ideally, they care as well. Like, look for a workplace that does, definitely. But even if they don't, you've got to care. All right. You're not your work. You've got worth beyond, just a reminder to devs, right? You've got worth beyond the given situation, beyond the given project, beyond the given position or role, beyond the given company, and even beyond your career in tech. You're valuable as a person regardless. This is a good place to start any kind of negotiation. It'll help you stay calmer. So there is a personal cost to trying to achieve excellence at all costs. You got burnout, lower lifetime earnings, and possibly worse titles. And this is especially true if you're part of a demographic that's underrepresented in tech. So you will need to put in the effort to look after yourself and look out for yourself. The thing in these bad situations like burnout is that your company, your boss, and your colleagues are not going to be really affected. They'll be affected for a while, but they'll get someone else in and they'll do the work. But the impact on your career will be very significant. Your cost of your personal relationships, the cost of, as I said, your earnings, if we're talking about not asking for raises when you should or not getting them. So this will follow you throughout your career. And you can compensate, but why make it hard, right? Better keep the car running regularly with regular maintenance than to have to buy a new one every so often. It's much harder. There are many ways to achieve excellence, I think, at work, and some are more sustainable than others in business. Try to negotiate towards those paths. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry for running over the time quite significantly. I see the clock. I think we're kind of okay with the meetup timing overall.
We've got time for a couple of questions.
We do? Okay, great. That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
All right, so any questions on negotiation or how to apply this to your own roles so they're not opsy?
Yeah, so say for example, you're building a technical team in a company that hasn't previously had one. And
That has not had one.
That has previously not had one, yeah, and
Okay.
all the work's been outsourced. In the case of introducing the higher-ups to the dev mentality, because developers want career progression, we want to be motivated, we want to collaborate with each other, but at a company that's primarily just been doing sales day after day, at what point do you walk away because the company doesn't understand those motivations, or at what point do you stick it out because they might start to understand them?
That's a great question. So at what point, like the exact point will vary by company to company and by project to project. It's also kind of personal. Like I would probably tolerate it for far longer than necessary given the story. Like I haven't changed my personality completely, right? Whereas I don't recommend doing that. So, but what is the exact point? Like is it 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months? Who knows? So what I would say is, record regularly how interacting with those people makes you feel. And record progress. Do you think they're getting it a bit more? Or, you know, is it the exact same conversation, like a brick wall you're talking to over and over again? And so there I would also say the work of digital agile coaches might be relevant because agile is essentially often, well, in practice it often turns into an attempt to explain exactly what you said to exactly those kind of stakeholders. So I'd probably check out their kind of work, and I can't give you names except Gitte Klitgaard from the top of my head, but there are many people who how to introduce agile into an organization.
Yeah.
And some of them probably have thoughts on when to stop trying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be interesting to find out. Yeah, I'm familiar with the SCOF methodology of management as well.
Okay.
So have you heard of the SCOF?
I'm not, so what's up?
So SCOF is a methodology where, in order to keep the team running happy, you've got to account for status. So that is how the individual feels about the job and what they're working on. I can't remember what C stands for now. A is autonomy, so how much choice they've got as a part of their role. R is relatability, so that's the difference in a team where if you've got a team leader that's a leader or a boss, boss is someone that bosses around the team, leader is someone that gets their hands dirty with the team and that type of thing.
So how does this methodology,
So
help you in some way?
it's more in managing the team and how you share that with your stakeholders.
Oh, okay, so you want to share that as a framework with the other business stakeholders, like senior stakeholders, so that they understand why people might not be happy in this environment. Okay, yeah, I guess that's probably a relatable way, so long as they can actually relate to, like, because like a dev's relatability is different to their own.
Yeah.
So this is where having empathetic business leaders is kind of necessary. Definitely. If they haven't developed the skill, the empathy skill, yeah, sometimes it's easier to go to something else.
So you say if they can't empathize, it's worth walking away at that point?
Yeah, I mean, like personally, if I literally have the same conversation, if there really is not progress, right? If they say, oh yeah, and then they have to have the same convo, and they really are not getting it after 3 months of that, and I've tried different approaches to trying to get them get it, I'd start looking for something else. That's personally how I feel in that situation, but it's very subjective. Right. Is there any other questions? Right. If you want to talk to me like privately about a current situation or a difficulty or like some negotiation that's making you anxious to think about, then you're welcome to do that now. Or email me actually, or DM me on Twitter. All right, well, cheers folks. Thank you for listening.